Back again to the Dark Souls trilogy, and once again I asked y'all to pick which run I should do, and y'all picked piercing swords only. So this is me taking on the Dark Souls trilogy with only using piercing swords. Also, make sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more crazy runs like these, or just like seeing me suffer. With that said, let's get into the rules for this run. Rule number 1, piercing swords only. Shocker, I know. Rule number 2, I cannot use magic weapon, lightning blade, dark blade, or any of those types of spells. I normally would say I could use power within, but since people don't like it when I use it, I'll restrict it this time. Rule number 3, resins are allowed because it makes fighting some bosses a bit more interesting. Number 4, no summons, gotta do all the work on my own. Number 5, I must rank each weapon at the end of each run and suffer the wrath of the comments section. And lastly, rule number 6, I must beat all bosses. With the rules out of the way, let's get this run started. I start off by naming myself Rickard because I'll need a fancy name for using a fancy weapon, and yes, the D is silent at the end of it. For my class, I go with the Thief for the Master Key and the Bucklet Shield, leaving me open to pick the Blackfire Bombs. The reason for picking the Blackfire Bombs is to do an Asylum skip. You see, when killing the Asylum Demon, if you quit out right before receiving its souls, it will trick the game into thinking you killed it, but in actuality, the boss is still alive. So when you go to talk to Oscar, you will give you the Big Pilgrim's Key, allowing me to escape the Asylum while keeping the Asylum Demon alive. With me being free, I go to New Londo Ruins, where I can get my first piercing weapon, the Estok. The Estok, like most piercing swords, focuses on dex scaling. As a piercing sword, it's really good at poking with its light attacks. A unique thing about the Estok's heavy attack is that it's a slash instead of a poke, allowing it to deal thrust and regular damage. On top of this, the Estok has the longest range out of all the piercing swords, making it a good weapon to hit enemies from afar or keep enemies at bay. After getting the Estok, I also pick up some souls along the way and grab the red tier stone ring since I can't use power within. With gathering some souls, I buy the rapier from the male merchant, snag some gold pine resin for later use, and hit up the female merchant to buy rotten pine resin. The rapier is pretty much the same as the Estok with its movesets besides its heavy attack. Its heavy attack is just a plain old thrust instead of a slash attack, and it has a shorter range. The small upside to it is that it has a bit higher crit rate to it. A cool thing about the Asylum skip is that it keeps the Asylum Demon alive, but what's even cooler is that you can get him to fall down with you to the Stray Demon. Well, I tried. With the Estok being a bit low on power, I use the rotten resin to poison him, to then fuck it all up and die. On the bright side to this, I do get to try to make the Asylum Demon fall down with me again, and successfully did it this time. And the Stray Demon actually gets to kill the Asylum Demon. The downside to all this is that the Stray Demon's health bar no longer shows up, so you have to just hope and pray he'll die quickly. He did not die quickly. It was at this point I realized the running attack for piercing swords is a double thrust attack. At this time, I didn't think anything of it, but I will find out later on this is the strongest attack for this weapon type. The Stray Demon fight went on for so long, I actually thought it was bugged out for a minute, but luckily that was not the case. With receiving 20,000 souls, I used those souls to get my rapier upgraded to +5 and use my leftover souls to get my dex to 27 and strength to 10. Apparently, the local hollows heard about my piercing prowess and had to see it for themselves. I'm pretty sure I left no customer unsatisfied. Once done doing Gwen's work, I use good old gravity to chip my HP down to 20% and take on the gargoyles. With the gargoyles being much larger than my previous customers, I had to power boost my rapier with lightning to make it vibrate harder, because it's scientific fact, the faster your sword vibrates, the more damage it will deal. And you can't tell me that those gargoyles weren't satisfied. 6 pumps and they were done. That's 5 more than I can normally do. After another happy customer, I buy some shards in the weaponsmith box. Then find Lautrec and kick him over the edge, because a fancy man needs a fancy fat brain. I then headed to Lower Undead Burg, fighting my way through a horde of dogs, but I didn't shock them, so no need to call PETA on me. The reason for coming down here is for the Mail Breaker. The Mail Breaker has the same moveset as the rapier, but is a much shorter weapon, but makes up for that short size with higher critting power. Or that's what we short sword kings like to say to fair maidens. Speaking of fair maidens, Capra Capra Demon was up next and he gave me a taste of my own medicine. But this worked out in the end because now I could go upgrade my Mail Breaker to +5, go back into the fight, survive the onslaught of attacks, and use my shield to block the dog's attacks and poke them with my short sword, which still managed to bounce off the damn wall. I honestly thought with the weapon just poking forward it wouldn't come close to doing that, but it managed to prove me wrong. No worries though, because with the dogs out of the picture, I could just use gravity and some well-timed prodding to bring Capra Demon to his knees. I then entered the depths to get the large ember so that I could march all the way to Blighttown to hunt the leeches for large Titanite shards, and to once again forget to modify my weapon before coming down here. One day, I will go to Andre first and not do all this backtracking. After that mess up, I was going to visit Quelaag, but it just felt wrong not visiting Mildred first, because I know most of you wanted this. With y'all all now satisfied, I will now satisfy you again with Quelaag. Except for those who don't like spiders. Either way, I used poison beforehand to trigger RTSR and applied gold pine resin to my stock. I was expecting to not do that great of damage because of how bad I heard piercing swords were in DS1, but with RTSR and a bit of vibrating, they can deal some nasty damage. And let me tell you, later on I can show y'all they are not that bad of a weapon to use. With Quelaag being fairly slow, it wasn't hard to run around her attacks to get a few pokes in, and with dealing around 300 damage per hit, it didn't take very long for her to die. I then visited her brother, making sure to steal their sister's clothes because even fancy men like to dress up and feel pretty sometimes. After stealing the clothes, I killed the poor lug by pumping him 7 times and then got my dex to 42. Once done leveling, I run over to Sin's fortress, poke some snake men in the bum, and find my evil twin brother, Ricardo Gonzalo Pedro Montalban y Moreno, or Ricard for short. Sadly, it was time for my twin brother to die for me to avenge our family name, and more importantly, to get his sword. The Ricard Rapier is basically the rapier but has higher scaling and dex, and its R2 is a combo attack of 3 thrust. Sadly, just spamming R1 is better than it, but I don't know that just yet. Of course, with having a new weapon, I need to get it upgraded so that the next boss isn't Hell, which in this case is the Iron Golem. I knew with having RTSR and Gold Pine Resin, this would be a safe time to test out the combo attack to see if it was any good. So by itself, it did 332 damage, a single thrust does 234. You can get 2 normal pokes off at the same time it takes you to do the combo, dealing 468 damage, which is 136 more damage than the combo. My guess is that this combo is meant for like PvP for knocking back shields, so it's pretty clear I won't be using this move anymore. With Iron Golem defeated, I level my dex to 50. Around this point, I would go to ONS, but instead I went back to Darkroot Gardens to get a more fitting outfit for a man of my stature, while also taking out an annoying butterfly so that I could get the Divine Ember. And quick side note, be wary of stairs, they can be a bit deadly. But after recovering from my fall, I threw a ninja off a cliff for the wood grain ring, and then went to the female merchant to get charcoal pine resin, dung pies, and blooming purple moss clump. I then used the dung pies to toxic myself to trigger RTSR and use the blooms to heal the toxic, having me ready for ONS. To help with the damage, I applied the resin for fire damage, and for mobility, I removed the FAP ring for the wood grain ring so that I could dodge the boss's attacks easier, allowing for me to poke them more. The smart thing to do here would be to kill Smo first and then Ornstein for the Leo ring, but I just wanted an easy win, so I decided to kill Ornstein first. Overall, the damage wasn't horrible, but with RTSR, fire damage, and having a +10 weapon with an A scaling and dex, which is at the soft cap at the moment, I was expecting more than 247 per hit. But luckily, Ricard's rapier can poke fast, so Ornstein wasn't too much of an issue. For Smo, he was super easy. I just had to run around his slam attacks and then poke him a few times. He is much weaker to fire than Ornstein, so he took even more damage, making this fight go by quickly. With my dex being at 50, I no longer needed to put points into it, so I started working on my intelligence level because the next weapon I'll be getting will be scaling with it. Speaking of that weapon, I needed to head to the Painted World to get it. I just need to do a bit of hardcore parkouring with a dash of quitting out, and I can get the Velka's Rapier. The Velka's Rapier is the most unique piercing sword, with it having a B scaling in intelligence and a C scaling in dex. To add to this, its heavy attack is a fancy slash attack in the shape of a V, giving off some Zoro vibes. And I'm not talking about the one from One Piece, I'm referring to the OG Zoro from the Mask of Zoro. Velka's Rapier also deals 110 occult damage, or for my longtime subscribers, oculate damage. The minor downside to this weapon is that it needs Twinkling Titanite to upgrade it, and it can't be buffed. To leave this lovely place, I must take on everyone's favorite Dark Souls 1 boss, Priscilla, and I know that's the truth because I did a poll recently and Priscilla basically won by a landslide. So come to find out that piercing swords don't have great poise damage because for the life of me, I could not get Priscilla to appear, forcing me to run in circles, poking at her feet until she eventually died, which was roughly 6 minutes. To reward y'all dear viewers, here's my character's fancy bum. Once done showing off my bum, I placed the Lord Vessel, farm-bought Twinkling Titanite to get my new rapier to +5, and took on the Fire Sage, where I found out how busted the running attack on Piercing Sword is. A normal attack does 361, a running attack deals 816 because it can hit twice in one hit. Even if it misses the second hit, it will still deal 408 damage. This was a massive eye-opener for me and greatly helped me in the DLC fights. With that said, I ran through the Fire Sage. Being a fancy and intellectual man, I switch out my gear for one with higher fire resistance, since I'm going to be surrounded by lava and the Centipede Demon. I died in the lava. Being a fancy man who is a formal intellectual, I made sure to jump dash rush to the large platform to poke the Centipede Demon's feet to death. A lot of foot action going on here. I won't be too surprised if Miyazaki himself stops by. After this was the Bed of Chaos, so nothing new here except for me getting my intelligence to 28. With that done with, I returned to Anor Londo Ruins to get the very large Ember so that I can upgrade my weapons as high as possible. From here, I visited Dom to get Gold Pine Resin and went take on the second Lord Soul, Seath the Scaleless. Another fight that wasn't too hard. I made sure to use Ricard's Rapier here for the Gold Pine Resin for the extra lightning damage, which with a single hit from a running attack into Seath's stomach was around 1700 damage. After 2 hits to the stomach, I went for his tentacles, and when he was around a quarter of health left, I charged in for his stomach again to finish him off. Not going to lie, RTSR is making even the supposed worst weapon type in the game very strong. Or maybe the fancy swords are just that good. With Seath dead, I get my intelligence to 32 and go take on Sif because I need 2 rings. I decided to play it safe with Sif and go in without RTSR, but went in with Velka's Rapier, and with it having a B in intelligence and a C in dex, the damage output on this weapon is much higher than Ricker's or the other piercing swords. I'm dealing 214 on a basic hit alone. The other swords had to be buffed to reach that amount of damage. It's just a shame this weapon can't be buffed as well, or it would be an absolute monster. Thanks to its high damage, Sif went down swiftly without me having to see her suffer. After the fights, I get the Hornet Ring for the final boss, and with having the Ring of Artorias, I can take on the 4 kings. With the kings being weak to lightning, I had to go in with Ricker's Rapier for this one. Normally, I would strafe to the right of the 4 kings to avoid their attacks, but it can be a bit risky to do that, and with using RTSR to help with the DPS check, I decided to play it super safe by just rolling into the 4 kings attacks and then punishing afterwards. Honestly, I got really lucky here with the RNG because not a single king did his bullshit homing missile attack, allowing me to get the first try. With the kings defeated, I run on down to the catacombs to poke Pinwheel a few times since he is weak to being pierced from behind. From here, I enter the Tomb of Giants to get the large Divine Ember and of course take the expressway out of the tomb. I then gather the materials I needed to turn my normal rapier into a +10 Divine Rapier. With my weapon now being Divine, I can permanently kill Nito skeletons. What I didn't expect was to do 88 damage to Nito. Like, I get the rapier isn't the strongest weapon, but 88 is extremely low at this point. I'm also pretty sure this is because it's Divine. If it was just a normal rapier, it would deal more damage than this, but I could be wrong. Even if I had RTSR here, that would only be 176 damage. Velka's rapier was doing over 200 without any buff. With that said, Nito and I danced around for a hot minute until he eventually perished. After almost dying of boredom, I poke off a few Hydra heads and then get tickled by a furry hand to take on the Sanctuary Guardian, and the running attack went burr here. The Guardian was super generous this time around with his dive bomb attacks that I could just charge on in from behind, dealing over 600 damage. The game is really making me regret not getting the Leo ring because it probably could have been even higher than that. But a few charge attacks later and the kitty cat went down. At this point, I no longer needed to gather any more materials, so it's boss rush time, and Artorias is my first victim. To speed up this fight, I went with Ricker's Rapier for the resin buff. The first half of the fight was a bit slow because I couldn't get a good opening for a running attack, but I found I could get one in after he finishes buffing up and after he does his giant jump attack. With dealing 700 plus damage, the fight didn't last long after that. Up next is Manus. I once again went with Ricker's Rapiers for the buff, but don't worry Velka Rapier mains, its time to shine will be coming up very soon. So Manus was a bit trickier with getting running attacks off that I had to switch to just doing normal pokes, which worked well for me because with just 2 pokes I did 900 plus damage. My hope was in phase 2 he would do his room wide attack so that I could just charge on in for a running attack, but sadly he never did the attack, so I had to just stick with my normal pokes for the win. Now it's time for Calamite, and oh boy, was this one a rough one. Round 1 didn't go so well. I ended up getting some bad RNG and he decided to charge right after an air dive, catching me off guard completely, leading me to my death. For round 2, I found I could get a running attack going after his wide fire breath attack, but the damage wasn't that great. I probably should have been less lazy and went to get some gold pine resin, but as you can see, I went with Velka's Rapier instead. What I ended up finding was that if I kept my distance and ran to the side, I could bait Calamite into doing his air dive attack, which I could roll under his tail as he passed to get him to do his tail slam, allowing me to perform a running poke. Tragically, the damage even for this powerful attack was fairly low, so it meant I had to repeat this for over 7 minutes until he was finally defeated. And trust me, I was on the verge of a heart attack the entire time since I could die at any second from one slip up. With Calamite out of the picture, it was time for Velka's Rapier to shine. You see, there are 3 bosses in the game that are super weak to occult, and the first one on the agenda is Gwyndolin. In one charge, I was able to deal over 1000 damage, followed up by 2 pokes to finish this fight in a matter of seconds. After this was the Taurus Demon, except the Taurus Demon is not the one weak to occult, that would be ONS, which I wasn't aware of at the time. But to make up for that, here's a fun fact for you. Did you know if you do a jump attack off an edge, you'll just double tap the boss on the plunge attack, allowing me to one-shot the Taurus Demon with me dealing over 2000 damage to him? Oh, also killed the Gaping Dragon after this fight because I forgot about the poor guy. But with all the bosses out of the way, that just leaves the last boss who is weak to occult. Before that though, I leveled up for the last time to 80. For Gwyn, I make sure to be in RTSR while having the Hornet's Ring on. In a single riposte, I dealt 2465 damage, and with only needing to parry Gwyn twice, it was a very short victory. You see, I told y'all I was going to show y'all how strong these weapons can be, and with that, Dark Souls 1 Piercing Swords Only comes to an end. Total runtime was 7 hours and 14 minutes, with a death toll of 16. Gravity can be a bitch sometimes. Now it's time for the rankings. Coming in last place is the Mail Breaker. Sadly, this weapon has the lowest damage out of the bunch. It might pack a punch with a crit damage, but that's usually only beneficial in PvP. In 4th place is the Rapier, the jack of all trades, but master of none in this group of weapons. In 3rd place is the Estoc, thanks to its long range and versatility of attacks with its heavy attack. It puts it just above the Rapier, and with a heavy heart, I have to put the Velka's Rapier in 2nd place. This weapon really impressed me with how much damage it can deal, especially when you have the right stats for it. Now, can the other Rapiers technically pass it up since it can't be buff? Yes, but the overall damage and versatility of the weapon make it too good not to put it in 2nd place. If Velka's Rapier could be buff, it would 100% be number 1. But that spot has to go to Ricker's Rapier. With it being buffable, it can definitely deal more damage, but in my heart of hearts, Velka is number 1. Before moving on to Dark Souls 2, if you have been enjoying this video and would like to see more like it, please hit that subscribe button and hype the video. Any support would be greatly appreciated. With that said, let's jump into Dark Souls 2. Where I start by naming my character Ricker II because it's original. For the class, I went with the Swordsman, not for the high dex that it starts with, but for the fact its armor set is probably the best one in the game. Once free from the character creation, I headed off to Hyde's Tower to use the strongest thrusting sword in the game, Gravity. Oh, also, apparently the weapons in the game are thrusting swords, not piercing swords. The wiki for some reason for DS1 and 2 has them labeled as piercing when the game calls them thrusting. With that fun fact shared, I used the souls acquired to get my strength to 12 and ADP to 17. I then trotted on over to the Forest of Fallen Giants where I can get my first thrusting sword in the game, the Mail Breaker. The Mail Breaker is practically the same as it was in DS1, but now has the effect of Shield Piercer with its strong attack and has a C scaling in Dex and Strength. Right before getting Mailbreaker, I made sure to pick up some Aromatic Ooze so that the last giant fight would go by quicker. I will say the range on the weapon is still not great, but as we all know by now, with a proper sword wielder, any sword size can get the job done. And with getting a job done, I use my payment to get the blacksmith key so that I can now buy the Estoc and the rapier. The Estoc moveset is the same as before, where its light attacks are thrusts and its heavy attacks are slashes, but an interesting choice the devs made here is that the Estoc mainly scales with strength, not dex. Didn't see that one coming. The rapier is a rapier. It pokes things, but in DS2, the rapier actually has really good base power. So good, in fact, they had to nerf the running attack in its entirety. Maybe the running attack being the powerhouse that it is will return in DS3. It will not. I then upgraded my rapier to +3 and my stock to +2. I then came across a fair maiden who needed a good poking and found out for female patches you can loop her standing animation. This might be because of how much poise damage thrusting weapons do in DS2, which is greatly appreciated from DS1's lack of it, but I found it very interesting you could loop her. After killing female patches, I go to No Man's Wharf to get a fragment branch of yore so that I can access the Shaded Woods, where I can get the Chloranther Ring +1. With having that stamina recovery boost, I can take on the Flexile Sentry. I still had some leftover ooze from the last giant fight, so I made sure to apply it to my Estoc. I went with the Estoc for the fight because I figured the long reach would help with keeping a safe distance while attacking, which when facing the club side of the Sentry, which is the easiest side to fight, I had no issues draining its HP bar to 0. I'm starting to see why people say this is the strongest weapon type in DS2. With the Sentry Dispatch, I buy me another branch of yore and get my ADP to 20 and Dex to 22. I completely forgot about my Scorpion Gigolo friend in Shaded Woods, so I made sure to pay him for his time, and he rewarded me with the second Dragon Ring. While in the Shaded Woods, I made sure to use that branch I bought to free a Lion Man to kill him for a key. That will let me free the Bird Blacksmith, which I will need her later on for a specific weapon. Speaking of weapons, with me killing my Gigolo friend, I can buy the Black Scorpion Stinger. The Black Scorpion Stinger has the highest base damage out of all the thrusting swords, and it has innate poison on it. The only drawback to this weapon is that it needs Twinkling Titanite to upgrade it, which can be a pain to get. I then run over to Huntsman's Copse, where at the second bonfire there is a ledge you can walk off to access to a cave, and at the bottom of that cave is the Rickard's Rapier. Rickard's Rapier is pretty much the same, with it having its fancy heavy multi-hit attack, but it's actually good this time, which I will show in a bit. Plus, it gets an S scaling index when fully upgraded. After getting Rickard's Rapier, I stopped by Rockman and Shaded Woods to buy Gold Pine Resin for my next fight, which is Ornstein 2.0. With not using the rapier for a boss yet, I thought it would be a good time to see how strong the speedrunner weapon of choice is, and I can see why they use it. With how fast the weapon is, you can get multiple pokes off in a matter of seconds, and with how high its base power is, plus adding any buffs to it, you can do some serious damage within a short period of time. The interesting thing is going to see if it's the best out of all the thrusting swords. Once done with Ornstein, I get the Leo Ring for the counter damage on thrust weapons. I then get my Dex to 32, upgrade Rickard to +1, and take on the Pursuer. The main focus of this fight was to see how good Rickard's heavy attack was, since we already know its basic attack is the same as the other swords. Coming into this from DS1, I was expecting the damage to be low, but to my surprise, it was higher than the basic single attack. Now, this is only if the final hit of the multi-attack lands. The first few pokes don't do much damage, meaning this attack does need to be timed properly to get its maximum damage. Overall, this is an improvement from DS1, but I would say this is still only good for some situations, because you can still deal more damage with multiple basic pokes than the one heavy attack. But I still had fun using it in this playthrough and didn't stop me from killing the Pursuer with it. After the fights, I used my Fancy Man skills to summon a giant hawk to my aid to get to the Lost Bastille, where I can hit up Macduff. Too bad for Macduff, it's the job of fancy men like me to keep the working class working, so I steal all his stuff so he has to spend more money, which means he has to work more hours. Gotta keep this man working so I can get my weapons upgraded to +6. Once done exploiting the working class, I took on the Ruin Sentinels with the Rapier combined with the Gold Pine Resin, since they are weak to lightning, and with only being +6, this sword absolutely destroyed them. In all of my runs in DS2, I have never killed all the Sentinels on the first platform, but with how fast I could DPS them down, I didn't have any issues pulling that off, and people think magic is busted. With the Sentinels taken care of, I take out the two Pursuers for some Twinkling Titanite to get my Stinger to +2, and then level up my Dex to 47, which now brings me to the Skeleton Lords. The plan for this one was to use the Rapier with Gold Pine Resin to take out the Mage Lord, which in doing so will summon the Skeleton Wheels, who weren't that hard to take out but are easy to deal with on their own instead of with an army. I then used the rapier to take out the other 2 chumps to bring out their undead army. Here I switched to the stock to use its heavy attack for wide swinging hits in hopes of hitting multiple targets. Weirdly, it did struggle with this to a degree. Most of the time I would only hit 1 or 2 skeletons, but every now and then I would get them in a group. If I was a smart fancy pants, I would have brought alluring skulls to help out, but I kinda forgot about them. Either way, I was able to slay the army with my long sword. With that done, I met up with T-Swift in Harvest Valley to buy all of her shards and move her to Majula. I then poked a covetous demon in the bum with my old friend Stinger to see its damage output, and it was pretty darn good. I then popped some boss souls that I have acquired so far to get my dex to 50 and strength to 14. Once done leveling, it was time to visit Scorpion Gigolo's girlfriend, Nachka. Yeah, so I went in with Ricard's rapier and buffed it with resin, and its damage at +6 is kind of insane. Do most weapons around this point do this much damage? Honestly, after doing the fresh NG +7 runs, my brain has been kind of scrambled on what normal damage outputs are supposed to look like. Also shocked at how I could survive most of the time with getting hit. Much later on, I basically start face tanking bosses, but we're not quite there yet. After poking Nachka to death, I run from Doors of Pharos to Brightstone Cove, straight to the Prowling Magus, where I put too much faith into my friend Stinger. I thought with its base damage it would kill things super fast, but that was not the case. I really should have brought the stock for the wide swings to help with the mobs, but after speedrunning the last few bosses, I figured I would be fine. Which I was, but the fight was much slower than it should have been, especially when trying to kill the guys on the ground. Probably thrusting weapon's only weakness, cripples. Damn no legs giving me trouble. After the fight, instead of using my souls for levels, I bought bright bugs. For those who do not know, you can get 3 bright bugs before each major primal fight, meaning I can get 18 of them, which will help with the DLC and speeding up the last few base game fights. On the subject of primal and base game fights, I went back to Brightstone Cove to take care of a giant spider, and if y'all have watched any of my other runs, you know you could just bait out Freya's hyper beam attack to poke her backside. So the fight wasn't very hard, but by beating her, I got her soul, which I can trade in for Spider Silk. Spider Silk starts off with an S scaling and dex, but has pretty low base power. Just like how the Mailbreaker had shield piercing on its heavy attack, so does Spider Silk. The only thing Spider Silk doesn't have is high crit like Mailbreaker, but I guess when you have length, you don't need high crit power. Let's test that out for ourselves though, with the big ol' lug that is the Rockton. Ooh, well that's a bit disappointing. Just for reference, the weapon is at +2 and boss weapons can only go up to +5. I don't know why FromSoft does this sometimes, where they make boss weapons weaker than basic ones you can just pick up. Definitely won't happen in Dark Souls 3. Luckily the Rotten isn't a hard fight, so I went back and killed him twice. The reason for this was to get my faith in a Init stat to 20. You might be wondering why would I do that? Well, dear viewer, if you have 20 of both of those stats, I can talk to Emo Man here to buy the Chaos Rapier. The Chaos Rapier seems like a normal rapier, but it deals fire damage and scales with dex and faith. Hold on though, the really crazy thing about this weapon is that even though it can deal fire damage, it can be buffed with resins as well. Why does this thrusting sword get this perk while Stinger gets the shit end of the stick? I don't know. Probably because the Stinger gets a higher base power, but speaking of shit, I had to go back into the Gulch to farm leeches for Titanite chunks, so that I could get my normal weapons to +9. After upgrading my weapons, I started slaughtering some mannequins, committing arson because that's what fancy preteens do, and take on Mytha. As we just learned, Chaos gets the upper hand on poison types, so I went with Chaos Rapier for this matchup, and I take full advantage of it being buffable. The damage output does not disappoint, and I want to point out this is an unupgraded version of the weapon. Can you imagine how much stronger it'll be at +5? Mytha almost got me a few times because I was being careless, but thanks to some life gems I could stay in the fight to finish her off. With Mytha out of the picture and pretty much having my stats where I wanted them, I start working on leveling my health. I then parkour on over to Iron Keep to fight the Smelter Demon. For this fight, I went with the Stinger and the Rapier. My idea was to use the Stinger to poison Smelter Demon and then use the Rapier with lightning afterwards for my main damage output. Surprisingly, it took a minute before the Stinger got the poison proc. Might have been faster if I would have had two-handed it, but I had already applied the resin and didn't want to lose it. Thanks to the poison, it helped lower the boss's HP past halfway, where the Rapier had no issues finishing the job. Right after this was the big boss of the area, the Old Iron King, where I decided to test out dual wielding damage, and sadly it doesn't seem as good as just using a single thrusting sword. It really is a shame that most dual wielding options are not that great. It would have been nice if they were like the Bone Fists, but I'll be playing Elden Ring soon, and I heard dual wielding was done well in that game, so I'm looking forward to checking that out. But as expected, this boss wasn't very challenging. Still seeking a challenge after those last two fights, I went straight to the Lost Sinner. I figured the Smelter Demon strat worked out well, that it would do the same here, but decided to dual wield this time. So that by the time the boss gets to half health, it would be poisoned, but that never happened. Come to find out, the poison buildup is pretty low in the Stinger, and you really need to stay on top of bosses to get the poison proc. So I ended up just killing her the normal way of baiting out her jump attacks, and when her health was low, I just bum rushed her. With this fight done with, I get to level 106 with my vigor at 10, strength at 18, and faith at 23. With the 4 Lord Souls bosses taken care of, that means I can enter Draenlich Castle where I can get the Frozen Flower, allowing me to access Illyrium Lois for possibly the strongest thrusting sword in the game, but first I took on the Twin Dragon Riders since I was already here. I thought this was going to be a quick fight, but I had some bad luck with the twins staying on top of each other, making it a bit of a pain to kill the Blue Rider. To the point I actually thought I might die to them, but thanks to the power of Crack, aka Life Gems, I was able to power through to thrust the Blue Rider and then the Red Rider to death. After piercing my way to victory, I went back to Illyrium Lois to start farming Guardians for the Ice Rapier that has a whopping 1% chance to drop. The Ice Rapier is the most unique rapier after Ricker's Rapier, with its heavy attack being an ice projectile and it being the only rapier to have bleed buildup. Tragically though, it can only be upgraded with Twinkling Titanite, which I only had one of at the time. So when I went face Looking Glass Knight, I decided to use the rapier instead. Before taking on the knight, I made sure to get some ooze to be able to apply it on my weapon for the extra magic damage. Just allow me to destroy the Looking Glass Knight to the point I almost beat him before he could summon an ally, but I was off on my positioning, leading me to get hit, and giving the Looking Glass Knight time to summon. Too bad for him, since that let me poke him from behind to finish him off. With Looking Glass Knight defeated, I can enter the Shrine of Amana, where I can farm the local soldiers for Twinkling Titanite, so that I can get all my twink weapons up to +5, and I figured with them all fully upgraded, I would test them out on the Demon of Song. The first weapon I tested was the Ice Rapier, and it averaged 377 and 407. After this was the Stinger, and it only got 255, leaving just the Chaos Rapier getting 339. Now, Chaos Rapier does scale with Faith, which mine isn't at the soft cap yet, so it's possible it could catch up to the Ice Rapier later on. After using the Demon of Song as a test subject, I went back to Modula to up those Faith numbers and then went face Velstadt. It was time to see what this monster of a weapon could do, and it did not disappoint. If I could get multiple hits off, the damage was immaculate, but I overstayed my welcome and got smacked in the face. Luckily, thanks to the Wanderer set being a powerhouse, it only felt like a flesh wound. I then took advantage of Velstadt from behind as he powered up to lower his HP to the point I only had to poke him a few times until his legs gave out. From here, I go to Aldia's Keep, where I get to see how good thrusting swords are against NPC invaders. Is this the same for PvP in DS2? I never do PvP, but let me know in the comments if rapiers are good for it, because it does seem like it. What I do know the answer to is that thrusting swords versus dragons is that thrusting swords always win. Isn't that right, donkey? I then make it to the Dragon Shrine, where my hell awaits me. Not only did I die more times to this giant bastard than any boss in the game, but I also ended up dying to the Ancient Dragon, who is not a real dragon, by the way. I believe he was a giant turned into a dragon or something like that. I made the crucial mistake of not hanging out by the fake dragon's big toe. I figured I would be fine here since it's still next to his feet and made it easier to get hits in, but apparently if you do this, you'll just fly up into the air non-stop shooting fire, and it eventually caught me. Now on round 2, I was able to poison dash poke the fake bastard to death, but the real terror for me at this moment was this was going to be the only boss I died to in this entire run. Let's just hope that's not the case. Right after that egregious fight, I went take on the Giant Lord, who fortunately for me has a weak Achilles heel, so I just had to poke it a few times for him to die. The interesting thing about killing the last giant is that after the fight, if you talk to Ghost Guy at Draenlich Castle, you can get 2 weapons, and one being the Espada Ropera. The Espada Ropera is like all the other basic rapiers, but has better base damage and even gets an A scaling index. After getting the Espada Ropera, I collected the 3 remaining souls of a giant to be able to fight Vendrick. For Vendrick, I decided to use him as my test dummy for all 9 weapons, but I don't want to spoil anything for the ranking, so I'll just leave it at that. With Vendrick defeated, I headed to the DLC to start the Boss Rush, or, as I should say, the Slaughter. I knew I was most likely going to have an easy time with the DLC fights, but I didn't expect to end up first trying all of them. It came close in a few fights where I almost died, like in Fume Knight's case where I usually dropped the ball in his second phase, but was able to pull through, and the more immaculate win was Sir Alone, where I somehow managed to not die at the end with me getting greedy. Blue Smelter Demon was a pushover with poison as usual. Alana would get hits on me, but the Wanderer set being maxed out plus me having 50 in faith just meant I could take whatever she threw at me, and poor Sin never even got a chance to do any real harm with me just baiting out his fire breath attacks to cave in his chest. You might be thinking, what about the cats. Yeah, no, Ava melted to back pokes, and the twins almost had me a few times, but I was able to save it and then DPS the last one down with a bright bug, which just leaves the Ivored King and the 3 douches. I honestly thought the Ivored King was going to walk all over me, but with aromatic ooze for his soldiers, they were dropping like flies. They were dropping so fast, in fact, I had to kite around the last soldier so that my knight could close the final gates for me to fight the king, who didn't even last a minute within the fight, and I think for the first time ever, my knight stayed alive. If that right there doesn't show you how strong this weapon type is, I don't know what will. And lastly, the 3 assholes who were just plain annoying. I just ran in circles for almost 10 minutes until I eventually won. With me slaying the entire DLC, I went visit the last few bosses I missed, where I used the stock to kill the rats, then used the Bright Bug Lightning Ice Rapier to snipe some rat dogs, and then put down their mother. After this, I used Bright Bug Viagra to boost Mailbreaker's damage, and where I noticed it wasn't that bad of a weapon as I initially thought it was, leaving just the gargoyles who were no match for Espada with my magic ooze, and I think y'all can already guess how fast the last 3 bosses went down. By the end, I was level 167, but I had one more boss that could kill me and save me from my nightmare of only dying to the Ancient Dragon, Dark Lurker. Of course, I'm not the type to throw a fight, so I gave it my all, as did Lurker, but he was just no match for the unstoppable weapon that is the rapier. He even got 2 cheap shots in after dying and still couldn't kill me. So I will forever now have to live with the shame that I died only to the Ancient Dragon. Well, it wouldn't be an Arcane video if I didn't drop the ball somehow, but sadness and depression aside, the Thrusting Swords only DS2 section comes to an end, with a total runtime of 11 hours and 20 minutes with a death total of 29. Shrine of Amana was a bitch. Now it's time for the rankings. Coming in 9th place is the Spider Silk. The weapon just lacks in damage and versatility, plus you need Petrified Dragon Bones to even upgrade it. In 8th place is Mailbreaker. The only reason it's in 8th and not 9th is due to its speed of attack. In 7th place is the Stock. Might have good range, but with its scaling in strength and its only unique factor being it can attack wide, it doesn't hold up to the rest of the roster. In 6th place, and this is where things start to get tricky, is Black Scorpion Stinger. It has great base damage plus poison, but it just doesn't scale well, reducing its overall damage output. In 5th place is the Rapier. I know it's shocking, it's the speedrunner's weapon of choice, but in overall damage output, it just falls short. Which brings us to 4th place and 3rd place with Ricard's Rapier and Espada Repara. Both average around the same damage output. Ricard's scaling helps it out while Espada's base power helps it. Espada just comes out ahead in damage to the fact it does scale with strength, so it can get a few points higher than Ricard's, but in all honesty, they are interchangeable. Coming in 2nd place is the Chaos Rapier, with it having B scaling in Dex and Faith while dealing fire damage while being buffable, just makes this weapon very strong, but not as strong as 1st place, which goes to the Ice Rapier. If any of you have watched my fresh NG+7 run, you knew this was coming. The Ice Rapier has the most versatility out of all the weapons with having a range attack, but also when being infused, it keeps the majority of its scaling at base power, just making it the king of thrusting swords. With the rankings done with, it's time for Dark Souls 3. Starting off with the class, I went with the Assassin since it has the stock. For my name, I went with Rickard III because like thrusting swords, I do one thing really well. With the character made, let's get into some weapon talk. The stock returns for the 2nd time and it has the same attacks as before with thrusting and slashing. The difference here is that the weapon returns to mainly scaling from Dex, then Strength, and has the weapon art Shield Splitter, which lunges the player forward with a powerful thrust that will damage enemies even if they're holding up a shield. Lucky for Gundyr here, he doesn't have one, or I sure as hell would use it. Or at least you think I would. But, like all prostate exams, Gundyr was no match for a stock in Butthole. Once done in stocking, I leveled my Dex to 17, invaded the High Wall of Lautrec, picked up some Gold Pine Resin, Undead Hunter Charms, some Titanite Shards, and a new prodding weapon called the Rapier. Interestingly, the Rapier takes over the Mailbreaker role here of having the highest crit multiplier of the thrusting swords. Tragically for my fellow short kings, our mighty Mailbreaker did not make it into Dark Souls 3. This calls for outrage. We need Twitter posts and popular content creators who jump on a bandwagon for views to cancel FromSoft for not being exclusive enough. And for those who struggle with knowing if things are a joke or not, this is a joke. Now back to the rapier. The rapier has the weapon art stance. When doing a light attack, the player does backstep dodge into a lunging thrust, and for the heavy attack, the player does multiple thrust attacks. I then got my rapier to +1, visited the local cougar to learn how to purr, and after my lesson, I took on Vordt. I decided to test out the stance weapon art, and the damage isn't bad with the light version getting 97 on hits and the heavy getting 140, but in all honesty, just using light attacks is much faster at getting damage off. After getting run over by Vordt, I retaliated by ripping his face off. After the fight, I poked, not shocked the dogs, and got the alluring skulls they were guarding. I then ran through Undead Settlement, getting charcoal pine resin to burn down a tree in a bit, get the sharp gem for a future weapon, the mortician ashes for human resin, and the fire clutch ring to help with fire damage. Oh hi, Henri. You have some nice armor there. It would be a shame if you ended up losing it. Don't worry, horse. I will wait until you're not around to take it because you kinda scare me. After that nice chat and potential murder plot, I make it to Iron Keep, where I start working on gathering Twinkling Titanite, get the Dream Chaser's ashes, some large Titanite shards, and the Fair Coal to be able to infuse the sharp gem into a weapon. I think it's time for the Trilogy tradition to meet up with our favorite Onion Knight to take down a demon. Except this time I was having no issues with soloing the demon with my rapier. With the demon defeated, it's time for a toast. Chin chin everyone, I hope your day is going well. Once done toasting, I get Flynn's ring and Clanthry ring. I then use the shards I gathered to get my rapier to +4 and my stock to +3, to then level my dex to 30. Having me ready for the curse-rotted Greatwood. For Greatwood, I went with this stock because I figured its reach could help out with popping some tree zits, plus there are not that many fights where it'll be that helpful. I also made sure to use my charcoal resin in tandem with the fire clutch ring for more damage. I never knew this, but the clutch rings also help increase the resin damage. I thought it would be only for spell buffs, but that's not the case. So with a fire boosted as stock, I made every zit popping lover's dream of popping all the pus bubbles on the giant tree until it was no more. After becoming the next Dr. Pimple Popper, I strip on down to my knickers so that I could use the Flynn ring on the Crystal Sage. But my power must have been too much for the Sage because after a few pokes he took much longer to resurface than he normally does, which threw me off, leading to me taking a crystal to the knee. Much worse than an arrow to the knee. Seeing that I needed more firepower, I put on the Fire Clutch ring and used some charcoal resin to burn the witch. And upon beating the Crystal Sage, I got his soul that I can trade in for the Crystal Sage Rapier, which has the exact same movesets and weapon arts as the Rapier. The only difference is that this weapon deals magic and physical damage with an A scaling in intelligence, D scaling in dex and strength, but it'll be a second before I use it. I then make sure to get the Paladin Ashes for the Lloyd Shield ring. I make my way into the cathedral to talk to St. Nicholas to take a ride on his sleigh to the Painted World, where I can do a bit of jumping to get the Crow Quills. The Crow Quills are by far the most unique thrusting sword in the game. When you're two-handing the weapon, you actually pull out throwing knives, and when you use the weapon art Quill Dart, the player will jump forward throwing the knives. The really cool thing about this is whatever resin or buff you apply to the sword will be applied to the throwing knives, so you can poison enemies or even bleed them. So, JK leads, when are we going to get a Quills only run from the Knaifu Master himself? Once done calling out JK, I upgraded the Crow Quill to +3 and infused it with a sharp gem for increased dex scaling. I headed back to the cathedral to get Lloyd's Sword Ring, killed the 2 giants for a large Titanite shards, and took on the Deacons of the Deep. I started off with the stock thinking its heavy attack would come in handy for dealing with the undead mob, but I never found a time it was worth using, so I switched to the Crow Quill for higher damage. Once the main Deacon was out, I used a Alluring Skull to distract the army so that I could do to this Deacon what priests have done for generations. With the Deacons out of the picture, I pop some souls and get my dex to 37 and strength to 13. Feeling like I needed more strength, I hit up a doc who gave me a sword pump to pump up those strength numbers, but who needs a sword pump when you have 3 lovely Abyss Watchers to do that for you? The first round was a bit rough. I ended up missing the backstab, which got me agitated, leading me to pressure when I shouldn't have and died. The funny thing is that missing the backstab happened again in phase 2, but this time I kept my cool and let the Watcher do his full combo so that I could walk around him to get the backstab. A bit of patience goes a long way. What also went a long way was the second Watcher sword up my bum. Not going to lie, I was caught off guard by this and got jump scared. My girlfriend had a good laugh at me. Luckily, I survived the surprise attack and was able to make it to phase 2, where the Watcher was so kind enough to keep doing his leaping attack that I can walk under to backstab him. This is also a good showcase of the crit damage with the rapier. I just repeated this a few times until I just had to poke him one more time for the finish. Right after this, I went straight to Walnir. I decided to use the Crystal Sage Rapier to try and get a few boss fights in with it, and the low damage was a bit unpleasant. Which is my fault, my intelligence is only 11 right now, but because of this making the fight last so long, I actually saw an attack by Walnir I have never seen before. He summons the sword you get from his soul and does an AoE attack with it. In all my 200 plus hours of playing this game, I have never seen this attack once. Probably the most surprising thing is that he never summoned any skeletons to come after me, allowing me to get the win. After learning something new about Walnir, I got my dex to 40 and strength to 20. I then sold some of my worldly possessions so that I could start leveling my vigor, which thank goodness I did because Croc Dog took a good chunk of my health off. But no worries, I paid it back tenfold so that I could get Pontiff's right eye. A very good ring matchup for the thrusting sword since they are equipped. Also, I never knew or just completely forgot that Silver Knights and Irithyll drop large Titanite shards. This would be very useful in some future runs, but the reason I'm here is to get the Leo ring since I could use the extra damage from the counter hits, and the last ring I get is the magic clutch ring for the Crystal Sage Rapier. With that done, I go to Smoldering Lake and die to the old Demon King by forgetting to switch back to my Estus. Even after 2 years of challenge running, I still make rookie mistakes. For the old Demon King, I went with the Crow Quills for its fast attacks, fearing it would make applying poison much easier. That was not the case. I only had one resin since I wasted 2 on the first attempt, so I had to stick with the old-fashioned way of fighting the Demon King by strafing to the right and poking away, but at least Pontiff's right eye and Leo Ring helped out with the damage, to make this fight go by quicker. I continued to keep leveling vigor for survivability. I then went back to Smoldering Lake to gather shards so that I could upgrade my rapier to +6 and Crow Quills to +5. While exploring, I came across a familiar face. I like your face, I think I'll make it my own. I regret nothing. With Henri dead, I can buy the elite armor from the Hag. Now I'm feeling like a real Ricard. I then hunt down the crystal lizards for different shards, used the undead hunter charm on a mimic to get the dark clutch ring, upgraded my rapier to +7 and took on Pontiff. With starting with the assassin class, I got the target shield from the start, so pairing Pontiff wasn't too hard, and the crit damage from the rapier helped out a lot with damage. Except things got a bit hairy for a moment, but thanks to all the vigor, I was able to survive my lack of skill. Even though the rapier is mostly good for crits, it did do a good job of killing the clone as it was being summoned. Unfortunately, Pontiff did get the second clone off, but I just played it safe and waited for jump attacks that you can parry to get the job done. Seeing how all that vigor saved my life, I figured I would get me some more of it. I then continued hunting down crystal lizards for shards, picked up the eastern ashes for large Titanite shards, to get my crow's quill to +6. I then killed 2 giant crystal lizards for their Titanite scales to get the crystal sage rapier to +2, having me ready for the dancer, whom I did not use the crystal sage rapier on, but instead used the crow's quill. I only have 11 in intelligence, so there's no way I'm using it for this fight. Shockingly, with the dark clutch ring, human pine resin, Lloyd sword ring, and Pontiff's right eye, the damage wasn't as high as I was expecting it to be. Maybe I should have switched out for the Calantha ring for the Leo ring since it's pretty easy to get counter hits on Dancer, but either way, it wasn't hard to dodge Dancer's attacks to get hits in and get the first try. I then hit up the Hag to buy gold pine resin, do the usual chunk gathering, and kill the Outrider Knight in Lothric Castle to obtain possibly the best thrusting sword in the game, the Irithyll Rapier. The Irithyll Rapier has the same basic moveset as other thrusting swords, but has Shield Splitter for its weapon art. The one difference about this weapon is that it has Frost buildup, which is really good since the majority of bosses are not immune to it, and for those who do not know, Frostbite is basically the same as Bleed, that when it procs, it will take a chunk of health off of the enemy. On top of this, it has good base damage and gets a C scaling above strength and dex, meaning it could deal some serious damage once those stats reach the soft cap. But back to Lothric Castle, I made sure to get all the Twinkling Titanite there because Irithyll Rapier needs it to be upgraded. Quick side note, I don't know if I've ever shown this, but for the first plus of man, you can actually get behind him by going to the left. By doing this, you can attack him from behind with no worries of ever being hit. Hope this helps someone out there. With all the chunks gathered, I was able to get the Crow Quills to +9, making me ready for Osiris. Or at least I thought I was. I had a pretty nasty start right there. I was able to survive, but to add insult to injury, the Crow Quill wasn't doing the best damage to the fleshy dragon. I expected with a +9 weapon and lightning buff the damage would go nuts, nuts, but it sadly did not. I did find that the fight was easier without locking on. The rapier's pokes had a tendency to miss where the lock-on point was, so by just unlocking, I could manually aim at the legs to get hits in. So if you're ever using thrusting swords at DS3, you might have an easier time if you're not locked onto the boss. With that said, I was still able to get the job done on the first go. With Osiris out of the way, I get the Path of the Dragon and the Dragon Scales in the area. I then use the Path of the Dragon to meditate on over to Archdragon Peak to get the Lightning Clutch Ring and to one-shot a Wyvern with a Crystal Sage Rapier, because we all know it's the best weapon in the game for this. Now, the real reason for coming here was to find a naked noble Frenchman in his natural habitat. By killing this rich noble Frenchman, I can get the Ricard's Rapier. As expected, Ricard's Rapier has the same moveset as the other regular thrust swords, but has a higher scaling index and has the weapon arch Ricard's Lunge and Press. This has the user lunge forward, pressing their sword into unwanted faces. Very accurate to how most nobility acted with their swords. Isn't that right, Aegon II? While being at Archdragon Peak, I get the Dragon Chaser's Ashes and a Titanite Slab. With this, I can get my weapons to +4 and +9. I decided to use the slab on the Irithyll Rapier. The reason for this is that I went fight Champion Gundyr next, and he's susceptible to frost. With thrusting swords being a fast weapon, it didn't take long to get a frostbite off. Actually, something I noticed is that frostbite seems easier to get off than bleed, and it's not just this fight. You'll see later on it really does seem to proc more often than other effects. Either way, Gundyr went down quickly thanks to frostbite so I could get the coiled sword. I then level up to 70 where my strength is at 25 and intelligence is at 20, which is just poor stat management, but I made it work. Up next is Dragon Slayer Armor, who's actually susceptible to frostbite, making me think he was going to be an easy win, but I end up dying 2 times. You see, when I fight Dragon Slayer, I like to unlock for him because I find it easier to run around him to dodge attacks and get hits in, but with using the thrusting sword, I found myself missing the majority of the time, leading to Dragon Slayer taking advantage of that to smack me to death. So I had to do the opposite of what I normally do and lock onto him to get hits in. Luckily, just strafing to the left helps a lot with avoiding some of his attacks, so it wasn't too hard to get pokes in to proc frostbite. What also helped was stripping and putting on Flynn's ring for the extra damage, and that extra damage definitely helped because I was able to get the boss on the 3rd try. Remembering that I can't take on the twin princes until Aldrich and Yorm are dead, I trade in the coiled sword for a Titanite Slab to get Ricard's Rapier to +10 and take on Aldrich with it. I tested out Ricard's weapon art and it did some decent damage at 619. It still could be better, but I can see this being good for NPC fights, or I hope at least. Tragically, my hubris got the better of me near the middle of the fight, and I thought I knew Aldrich's moveset. Come to find out, I don't know it that well. But with learning my lesson from that attempt, I made sure to focus on R1 spams for some juicy damage with Gold Pine Resin and Lightning Clutch Ring, and made sure to stay at full health since I am prone to fucking up. Thanks to those 2 things, I got the 2nd try. That brings us to Yorm, where I used the rapier for crit damage once Yorm's stance was broken. I also made sure to get a few attacks in before doing repose to lower Yorm's health faster, and who knew Yorm was related to the King of Giants from DS2 because he too also had a weak Achilles heel. With Aldrich and Yorm dead, I get my strength to 30, but then realize the twin princes are somewhat weak to magic, or at least the older brother is, so I go respect my points to give myself 40 in intelligence, 37 in dex, and 13 in strength. But before going into the fights, I make sure to get the 2 Titanite Slabs in the area and use one of them to get the Crystal Sage Rapier to +5, having the rapier fully ready for a boss fight. So let's see the crazy damage this bad boy can do with Pontiff's Right Eye, Leo Ring, Magic Clutch Ring, and Lloyd Sword Ring. Oh, 287. Not bad overall, but I was expecting a bit more from it, especially with its high scaling, but this is the downside to this weapon. With it dealing magic damage and not pure physical, it has a tendency to underperform in damage output, since majority of the bosses in DS3 have pretty high magic resistance, and unlike spells, this weapon can't be further buffed like they can. I can see it being good for mages as like a backup weapon if an enemy gets close, but that's about it. But for PvE, it just ain't cutting it. Lucky for me though, it only took 2 tries to win, even though phase 2 took longer than it normally does. After the fight, I had no more need for the Crystal Sage Rapier, so I removed all my points from my intelligence and put them into strength and dex for 40 each, and the rest in vigor. I figured with only 1 base game boss left before the Lord of Cinder, I would take on the Nameless King so that I could just boss rush the DLC. For round 1 with the King, I went with the Crow Quill skills, but part of me found the damage to be a bit lacking, but tragically, or luckily, I ended up dying, so I changed weapons to the Rickar's Rapier to see if it's better at plus 10 when two-handing, and it actually does a little bit less damage. The Rickar's Rapier ended up doing 252 on counter hit, and Crow's Quill did 257 on counter hit. Not a big difference, but the Crow Quill's a bit faster with it being single-handed, meaning you can get more pokes in while using less stamina. Doesn't matter too much here because I was still able to beat the king with just the Rickar's Rapier, but was cool to see the difference between the two. After the fights, I get the Titanite Slab in the area to get the Rapier to plus 10, level up my Vigor to 25, and take on the DLC, with the first boss being the Demon Prince. Demon Prince was another fight where I would normally not lock on to help with spotting attacks from the second demon, but with how the boss is shaped, I found most of my attacks were just whiffing majority of the time, leading me to once again having to lock on, which forced me to play more passively, drawing out the first phase a good bit. For phase 2, I had brought Carthus Rouge in hopes to proc bleed, but I wasn't able to stay on top of the Demon Prince long enough to get it off. Second demon to stop me from getting a status effect going, so it's either me or the weapon. Probably me, but I'll just blame it on the weapon, like we all do. Fortunately for me, I just needed to hang out under the Demon Prince to get pokes in and take advantage of his Hyper Beam attack, where I made sure to finish the fight off in style, and as you can see, the weapon art is not that great of damage, even with all the daggers hitting the boss. After the Demon Prince was Half-Life, which is the same old boring fight. I do wonder sometimes if FromSoft tries too hard to be hard. It does seem like they want to top themselves a lot, which leads to them making objectively hard fights, but forget they also need to be fun. It's not hard to make a boss hard for the sake of being hard, but it is hard to make a boss fun and hard at the same time. Now, take a shot of water for every time I said hard so you stay hydrated, you lovely viewers. Ignoring Half-Life, let's talk about Gale. The plan for Gale was to poison him with Rickar's Rapier, but come to find out I couldn't poke him fast enough to get the poison going. I even tried using the weapon art, and yeah, that wasn't the smartest call. So I just said fuck it and switched to Irithyll Rapier in hopes of getting Frostbite off, but sadly could not play aggressive enough to get it going. So Gale and I slow danced around for a bit until he got tired of me and decided to put himself 10 feet under. After Gale was Gravetender, who I should have used Irithyll Rapier since it has the Shield Splitter weapon art, but I really thought Rickar's weapon art would be good for this fight, but every time I was about to break the shield, Gravetender would just step back. Very frustrating, but I did get the last laugh by poking him and his oversized mutt to death with my fiery stick. Then it's everybody's favorite 10 Toes boss, Sister Frieda, whose second phase can go to hell. I'll never enjoy this phase. It ended up killing me twice. But with the power of the Rapier's crit damage, I could slay the first phase with no issue, and with the power of running in circles forever, I could kill Father. For phase 3, I got super lucky. Sister Frieda kept doing her Black Flame jump attack, just allowing me to walk under her and get backstabs off. I don't think I've ever seen her do this attack this many times in one fight. But hey, I'll take the easy one. Time for a good old mid-year. I poked him in the face, poked him some more in the face, and poked him again in the face until he died. Exhilarating, I know. With 99% of the bosses dead, I level up for the last time to 94. By this point, I had enough vitality that I could become the true Rickard. Took 3 runs, but I can finally wear the full elite set, and no better fashion to end this run in. For Soul of Cinder, I of course went with the Irithyll Rapier for the Frostbite procs, and thanks to being beefier than I have ever been before, I was able to tank most of its hits like a champ while poking away at Cinder, until the right moment appeared for me to use my strongest thrust move up Cinder's derriere, bringing him to his knees and bringing this trilogy run of thrusting swords only to an end. Total run time of 9 hours and 26 minutes, and total death count of 29. But if we subtract the 15 intentional deaths, that's 14. Now it's time for the rankings. Coming in last, is a shock to none, the Crystal Sage Rapier. As I stated during the Twin Prince fight, this weapon dealing mostly magic damage holds it back, and it can't even be buffed with resistance or spells, just making it bottom tier. In 5th place is the Estoc, a very good early game weapon, but just falls off in the long haul. In 4th place is the Rapier. It has really good crit damage, which puts it above the Estoc, but overall base damage is just too low for it to go any higher. In 3rd place is Rickard's Rapier, a fantastic weapon for its damage and decent weapon art, but just falls shy to be in the top 2. Which brings us to 2nd and 1st place. From an objective standpoint, Crow Quills takes 1st, while Irithyll Rapier takes 2nd. With the Crow being buffable, it just makes it way more versatile, but for me personally, I like the Irithyll Rapier more because most bosses are susceptible to Frostbite, and its base damage plus C-scaling and dex and strength just allow it to do very good damage. With all that said, if you enjoyed this video and would like to see more like it, hit that subscribe button. At this time, I would also like to thank my channel supporters. If you too would like to support the channel or have your name in the video, video, you can click the Patreon link in the description or click the YouTube join button. I also from time to time stream my runs, so you can catch me streaming on YouTube or on Twitch at Akane Gaming. I want to thank you all for watching, and until next time, take care.